Okay, we're back. Now, another revolution that's happening during this time is thought. People start to think differently because of all the different situations in their day-to-day life and how those have changed. Now, there's a lot of reaction, right? Revolution. You see R, okay? Romanticism about revolution. Now, because of the Industrial Revolution, urbanism, and consumerism, a lot of people didn't like what was going on and reacted against that. And there's an actual group of people that was called the Luddites, and what they would do is that they would break in to factories and then smash and destroy machines because they didn't like the machines and how they're displacing workers and everything that went along with industrialism. And in case you're curious what happened to the Luddites, well, the factory owners eventually worked with the government to have Luddites not only arrested, but the charges involved a death penalty. And then when that happened, the Luddites quickly realized that, being put to death over smashing a loom in a factory really wasn't worth it. Another thing, another change in thought, is primitivism. This goes against the growth of cities during the time, and this is the belief that living in the country was more conducive to happiness and moral growth compared to living in a city. And tied in with primitivism is the idea that society corrupts people. In other words, if you had somebody growing up in a small village, with maybe just 100 people living in the village, that person would grow up to be happier and a more moral person compared to that person growing up in a city of, say, for example, 250,000. So the idea here that society is the corrupting agent upon the individual is another revolution in thought. And then a big one that the Romantics are known for is nature assuming the role of a spiritual power. And the term that's associated with this is Transcendentalism. Now, a lot of people today like to go into the woods or take walks in nature and say, oh yeah, that's the same thing for me. I love to be outdoors. I love to be in nature. Now, that's not the same as Transcendentalism. For the Transcendentalists, they have the same experience in nature that people have when they go to church or read the Bible. So what happens is that nature displaces organized religion and it becomes a deity. And we'll start to actually see this in the writing. The Transcendentalists will capitalize the word nature with a capital N, just like people capitalize God with the capital G. And this is another revolution in thought, another change in thought. So continuing with that, perhaps one of the greatest hallmarks of Romanticism is individualism. Now, when we talk about individualism, that's when the authority of determining right and wrong, good and evil, as well as truth, rests with the individual. So this is kind of an interesting thought. Before, right and wrong, good and evil, right, all of those things were determined by society. In other words, society determined whether or not you should do things. But now, the Romantics, the individual, him or herself, will determine what is right, what is wrong, what should I do? And another hallmark of Romanticism that's tied up in individualism is the idea of subjectivity. Now, when someone writes in the subjective perspective, and he or she uses I, then that I is the writer. For example, William Wordsworth, one of the writers that we'll soon reach in the class, wrote a very, very famous poem in which he says I in that poem. And the I in the poem is the poet William Wordsworth. And this was another revolution in thought, is that people realized, hey, my thoughts, my ideas are so good and so important that I'm going to represent myself in them. I don't have to have a character that will mirror my thoughts. I can put myself in my work. As well, in Romanticism, the imagination moves to the forefront and surpasses reason. The imagination becomes more important than logic and reason, and the imagination expresses newfound truths. Now, you might recognize the portrait there of Beethoven. He is a romantic composer, right? So this is the time frame that we're in. He's the primary composer, Beethoven. Now, a cool fact about Beethoven is that not too many people know is that when he wrote his most famous symphony that has the Ode to Joy in it, you might have heard that, is that Beethoven was stone deaf. Yeah, I know, it's really amazing. He was able to not only write music when he was deaf, but conduct it as well. And a lot of people say, how on earth can someone write music if that person is deaf? And the reason is that you can hear it in the imagination, right? So Beethoven wrote all those notes down, and unlike other composers who, would sit down at the piano and play the melody, Beethoven didn't do that. He was able to hear music within the quiet of his mind. So during this time, the imagination comes to the forefront. The individual is the judge of right and wrong. So these are some really, really big revolutions in thought that are going on during Romanticism. So I know what a lot of people are wondering, what's going to happen to the literature, since this is a literature class, Mr. Nogmus, and we'll get to those ideas next.